This conference will now be recorded.
Last time we left off with Chalav Yisroel, right? Which is, again, what makes milk kosher? Comes from a kosher animal, right? Now, we don't just buy fish and say, yeah, I'm sure it came from I'm sure it's kosher fish. We don't just buy meat and say, yeah, I'm sure it was properly slaughtered. We also don't just buy milk and say, yeah, I'm sure it's fine. But we can when it comes to milk in the United States, because the whole idea is we need someone to watch it to make sure that it is in fact what it says that it is. And the USDA is pretty strictly enforced that a company is not going to lose millions of dollars and be fined and be closed down by mixing in anything but cow milk, if that's what it says that it is. When one travels, though, abroad and started going to Europe, so there we do run the danger of people thinking, oh, Chalav Yisrael, that's just a chumrah, that's just a stringency, and that's what Chabad does, or that's what Chassidim do, or that's what the Charedim do, But the OU and the Star K and all of these basic foundational kashrut organizations will give a hechsher even if it's not Chalav Yisrael. So a person might mistakenly think, oh, so when I travel abroad, also I don't need to worry about these things. And there you do need to worry about those things, because different countries have different norms and different practices and different regulations. And what I've heard, though I don't know this, but is that actually pig's milk serves as a good preservative, that to make the milk sour much slower. I don't know, right? But right, it needs to be kosher milk, either that it's been watched by a Jew and therefore it's certified, or that it's under the U.S. Right now, this is something interesting. You go to Nally when she was running her camp. We used to take the kids to Hershey's Park, right? Hershey's is right. Is fine, right? Hershey's is fine. It has the OUD, right? Yeah, but some of the Hershey's is actually produced in Mexico. And there it doesn't have the OUD, right? So, right, if it's straight milk, you don't need to worry. Even if it doesn't, though most milks, you go to the grocery now, most milks will have either an OU or an OK, or it will have certification. But if it's 100% dairy, 100% cow's milk, it doesn't even need that. But anything else, once you get into chocolate, once you get into cheeses, once it starts to get processed, then you absolutely do need to have proper certification on it. And here in the States, right, so on the app that I told you about, the CRC app, so that the Chicago Rabbinical Council, that will give you a listing of the accepted kashrut organizations, right? Which means that they are basically up to the basic Orthodox standards, right? There is a hechsher that's not on their list, nor is it on Rabbi Idolitz's Kosher Quest, is another app which has lists and pictures of all of the different logos of the different companies, and that is, and you see a lot of products in Costco with this, that is a tablet K, right? And that is not on their recommended lists. And they actually give the certification on a cheese company. The name of the company is the Kosher Cheese Company or something like that, right? So that is certainly, well, somewhat misleading if one doesn't accept that certification. So you see the Kosher Cheese Company. What could be better? But that's sort of like the company that named itself Going Out of Business Incorporated, right? And that way, everything is going out of business sale, and therefore everyone tries to buy from it. Okay. All right, separation of meat and milk and waiting in between. So this we discussed a little bit, right? That most of the work goes into setting up your kitchen in a manner that there is separate areas and you have less mistakes, less errors take place, right? If this is where if the upper cabinet has your dairy dishes, then under there by the drawer, that should be your dairy silverware, and underneath should be your dairy pots and pans. And then in another area, right, should be your meat, etc. Okay. And we're going to come to a lot of this book deals with common kitchen she'elot. What are she'elot? Questions, shilas,
Question.
right? Those halachic questions that come up. Okay, let's just touch upon waiting in between milk and meat, waiting in between milk and meat, and meat and milk. Okay, when it comes to waiting between meat, dairy, and milk, how do we approach that?
Like starting with meat going to dairy.
If you've had dairy, can I then have meat?
You have to wait a few
Wait an
hours.
hour.
No, you can.
Okay.
You can just rinse.
Okay. So, right, typically, right, well, you can go straight from dairy to meat as long as your mouth is, right, if you still have some of the chocolate from that, Milky Way, and all that caramel stuck over there, right, then you don't want to start to eat a burger, right? But if your mouth is cleared, right, right, right. So typically we typically will wait. It's not a halacha. You wait 15 minutes, something like that, to make sure that, right, or you rinse out your mouth well, right? Or right, it also depends what you've eaten. Or eat something parva, like some crackers or something, which will help to clean out anything that's there. Basically, when it comes to the dairy to the meat, dairy to meat, you just want to make sure that you don't have that in your mouth anymore. So that will depend on the nature of what you've eaten. Okay. When it comes to the meat and then milk, so there are different customs. The standard custom is 6 hours. That is the standard custom. Okay? If a person is of German descent, so the Yekka community, as they refer to, they typically wait 3 hours. Person is of Danish or Dutch descent, so then they wait an hour. Okay? All of this is not min haTorah. It's not, this is rabbinic. But the standard is to wait 6 hours. You have little kids, they don't need to wait 6 hours. Okay? But the standard for adults is to wait 6 hours. The Gemara has two different, or halacha gives two different approaches, and we take on both of these, right? One of them is basar bein hashinayim, that there's meat that gets stuck between the teeth, which is fascinating because after 6 hours, it might still be stuck between the teeth, right? If one doesn't floss properly, right, it could still be there for a little while, right? But it's very fascinating that the halacha, well, we know that the saliva contains different enzymes and different digestive enzymes, which breaks down the food. So after 6 hours, it's considered to be, even if there is still some basar bein shinayim, right? Right? We don't say that you have to wait 6 hours and be sure to floss. Now, if you got something, so you might want to get rid of that before you have your ice cream cone, right? But otherwise, right, after 6 hours, the assumption is if there is anything that's still stuck there, it has been degraded already, right? And it's no longer an issue. Another one, right? So according to that, so listen, I'm an expert flosser. So let me floss right away and I'm good to go. No, you're not. Right? Because the second reason is that there is a shuman, there's a certain oily residue that that is part of meat fleshing, and meat will include, right, meat of an animal, beef, and also fowl. We treat it the same way, right? And that residue remains on the throat, remains there in the mouth, and therefore we wait the 6 hours for that. Okay. Meat and fish. What's with meat and fish?
You can eat them together, but not on the same plate.
Okay. So the Gemara, right, there's no Torah kashrut issue of meat and fish. The Gemara says that it is sakanata, that it is unhealthy. It's actually dangerous health-wise, right? So therefore, we don't, we can cook them, you know, you don't need to have a meat pot and a fish pot and a dairy pot, right? But you wouldn't put them on the same plate. You wouldn't eat them together, but one after the other using different plate, fork, etc. That is not an issue. Now, some people may say, "What are you talking about?" Right? What type of right? Right? We don't know of anything of any health danger by eating those things. So the way I like to look at that is I like to joke that I was born BC, not before Ciner, but before cholesterol, right? And when I was growing up, right, who knew about cholesterol? Right? Now we say cholesterol is the number one killer, right? And when I was growing up, liver was the healthiest thing in the world. Then liver was the worst thing in the world. Now liver, well, again, is the healthiest thing in the world, meaning we're constantly learning and finding out different things. So the Gemara says it's a sakana, right? So we keep those things separate. How about fish? I'm sorry?
Rabbi, I have a question. This is
Yes,
Esther.
Esther, how are you?
I'm sick.
Sorry
But
to hear
other than,
that. What's wrong?
I don't know. I think I've had the flu or something for a week.
Oh,
But but I am improving every day. I'm getting
good.
better.
Well,
So
feel better soon.
thank you. I have a question about the meat and fish and the order of those two, because I've heard that you eat the fish first and then the meat. But it sounds like what you're saying is you could do it in the reverse order, as
That
long
is
as the
correct.
utensils and plates are separate.
Correct.
Okay.
Typically, the Jewish Shabbos meal, you'll start with the fish, and then you'll have a l'chaim to clear it out in your mouth a little bit, and clear off the fish, and then go for for the beef or the fowl. But that's just how some people do it, right? But if someone would want to go the opposite order, that is not an issue whatsoever. There is no din, there is no law of waiting after meat or waiting after fish before having the other, right? That's not an issue at all. How about fish and dairy? Okay, so amongst the Sfardim don't have milk, don't have fish and dairy together. Okay? And that is based on what is commonly accepted as a typo in the Beit Yosef, right? But they follow that and they don't have, so they will not have a good tuna casserole for any of those who like tuna casserole,
No bagels and
or
lox?
what?
No bagels and lox?
No, well, bagels and lox, yes. It's not bagels, cream cheese
Wait,
and
bagels,
lox.
cream cheese, and
No?
lox.
Yeah,
You can't have a lock with a cream cheese.
yeah. So they have to go for the tafudi cream cheese, right? Yeah, yeah. The tafudi cream cheese is actually pretty good. Yeah, but I enjoy my bagels, cream cheese, and lox. Yeah, yeah. Is is that a particularly Jewish food or not necessarily?
I think
It is.
Bagels and lox. Yeah, that's like, to the outside world, that's considered a very like Jewish thing.
Uh-huh. And others don't eat it,
No,
or
others do. I think people, especially like in LA, because people will go to like a bagels like restaurant
Yeah.
that's actually a kosher bagel
Yeah,
spot, and then they would end
But
up getting.
they know that that's a Jewish plate for sure, right?
They could.
It's kind of
But
Yeah, I was
unspoken.
that
Yeah.
many years ago, so I always
It's an
celebrate.
unspoken, but it's more of a.
uh-huh. Okay.
I want to share something kind of funny. One of the late night shows was making a point of how there's such an intermixing of culture and like these big cities like New York City, right? So you're saying like, is the outside world more aware of like bagels and lox? Like probably in New York, the New York bagel, you have a mix of that culture. And so one late night show made like a little game show aspect to the show, where they're like, is it a Hasid or a hipster? And it was like comparing, because you see them in New York and like they have beards and these fedoras, and you're like, you don't know if it's a hipster, which is like that term for like
Right,
a
yeah.
cool hip person, or a Hasid. And so it's like, so
So
some
they
of
show
those
like a
things.
small segment of the face or
Yeah,
the
you see
beard.
part of their face and you try to guess which. So it's just kind of funny.
Yeah. So America is known as the melting pot. Not in favor of a melting pot, right? We're more in favor of what I call a cholent, right? A cholent is a nice mixture of lots of different things, but each one maintains its own identity, even as it gets along well and respectfully with all the other components of the cholent. So we don't want to give up what makes us uniquely Jewish, and we don't expect other people to give up what makes them uniquely whatever culture, right? They might identify with. But it should be like a challenge that we all get along together, and we actually, and it tastes good when people are all, it tastes good together, right? But each one maintains its identity. Okay, kosher fish we discussed already, right? What makes a fish kosher? Fins and scales. And as long as you find a scale, the Gemara says if it has scales, it has fins. So as long as you find, right, but the only fish that one could buy, without certification and without evidence of finding a scale on it is salmon or a certain type of trout. What's it called? The steel trout.
Like a pink.
Yeah,
Flesh.
any fish that has that pinkish, that orangish pinkish hue to it, that is, all of those fish are kosher fish. So I'm sorry?
What about tilapia? You were talking about these.
Yes, tilapia is a kosher fish, but the only issue is this, that if you go into a store and they say this is tilapia, if you don't find a scale on it, you can't know for sure that it is tilapia. And it's not simply that the guy behind the counter is trying to deceive you, but there is a tremendous degree of counterfeiting that's done throughout the fish industry because people can't really tell, and some fish are much more expensive than others, right? So it's not just that he's trying to deceive you. The question is his supplier, right? What got mixed in over there? What is it really over there? So that's why we need to ascertain for sure, right? But as we mentioned last time, if one were to go to Costco, you could buy, besides, of course, the Kirkland individually wrapped salmon, right, which has a hechsher on it, as does the tilapia in Costco have a hechsher on it. But even if you want to buy the sheets of salmon that they sell there, that's okay, right? Even though it does not have any certification on it, because you know that it is salmon, you know it's a kosher fish, and also it's not like you're going into Ralph's and they just cut the lobster for that guy and then the shrimp for that guy, and now they're cutting the salmon for you. You know Costco is doing it by the hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands, as they are processing that. And they're also very careful for any cross-contamination, right? And even if it would have something on it, you rinse it off, right? It didn't get cooked, which will come to some of the ideas of the common kitchen shailot that we have. Yes.
So when it's such a mass quantity of fish and it's annulled, is that the concept of bitul, right? Like
Okay.
is that the same or no?
Okay. So Gabriella brought up the concept of bitul. Bitul is annulment, right? That's something becoming nullified, or better than nullified, um, becoming overwhelmed by other kosher parts. Let's start to deal some of that, okay? Okay. So bitul means that something becomes nullified, okay? Now,
Would that be like if you're making a cholent and then like a drop of baby's milk goes into the cholent? If you have a certain amount of cholent, it doesn't affect, like you can still consume it, because it wouldn't be like a mix of meat and dairy because of bitul.
okay. So let's go step by step. There's something called bitul barov. Bitul barov means it'll become nullified by a majority, right? Many of you may be familiar with the idea of the 60-to-1 ratio. This is not 60-to-1. This is a 2-to-1 ratio. Okay? So if you've got similar tasting, so there's not going to be any taste of the non-kosher, as opposed to milk fell into your chicken soup. If you're talking about similar tasting, cold, dry foods, similar tasting, cold, dry foods, then the non-kosher is nullified by a simple majority. 2-to-1 is what we would need. Okay? Nevertheless, we wouldn't eat all three. Let's say it's 3 pieces. We wouldn't eat all 3 pieces at once, because then for sure you're eating that non-kosher piece. Okay? Right? And some say, right, which what we would do is that you've got to remove one piece. You know, you have no way of knowing if you've removed, right? But you can't eat all 3 of those pieces. Okay. What happens a lot more commonly in the questions that come up in a kosher kitchen is something splattered into something else. Okay? And that is when we're talking about, so that's when there is the taste of that non-kosher that is now mixed in to the kosher. So one approach of halacha is that, well, you bring in a non-Jewish chef and let him taste it, and let him see, is there the taste of this non-kosher food, right? Is there a little taste of ham, right, in these meatballs or not, right? Is there a little taste of milk in my chicken soup? Okay? We don't do that. We go simply with the concept of shishim. Shishim is 60. Shesh is 6, Shishim, 60. Of a 60-to-1 ratio. Okay? So if you've got 60-to-1 ratio of something that some milk dropped into your chicken soup, something like that, right? As long as you've got a 60-to-1 ratio of chicken soup to your milk, you are fine and you can eat that soup and enjoy your chicken soup. Now, adding milk to a chicken broth or to a meat broth will actually make it much thicker, much creamier. So I've got a great idea. I've got, let's say, 600 ounces of chicken soup in this big bowl, right? So as long as I put in less than
1 or 10 ounces.
10 ounces of, as long as I got 600. So as long as I put in less than 10 ounces, right, I'm good to go. So let me add in a nice 8-ounce cup of milk to my chicken soup. Rabbi, really? Just wait, right? And now I've got a nice, creamy, thick chicken soup because I've got less than the 1:60 ratio. Good to go, right? Wrong. Why wrong?
Your intention.
Good. Ein mevatlin iser l'chatchila. You're not allowed to go ahead and create a situation of bittul, nullifying something that is prohibited. If it fell in, right, that's something else. Then we can go with that. But if we can't add it in. Now let's say a little bit falls in and I've got my bittul, right? I've got enough, my 60-to-1. But now more fell in. And if I add up those two, I no longer have my 60-to-1 ratio. What do you say about that? How should we view that?
Add more chicken broth.
Hmm?
Add more chicken broth.
Ein mevatlin isel lechatchila.
So you can't.
Right? You can't, right? So Gabriella said, well, add more chicken broth. But that is, if it's a problem, then I'm going ahead to be mevatel the isser. It's not as egregious as adding in the milk, but basically some milk fell in. I don't have enough, so I'm going to add in more chicken. So what am I doing? I'm being mevatel that isser, right? So there are two ways of looking at it. One way of looking at it is once I had 60-to-1, whatever is in there is now negated. And therefore, I've got 100% kosher soup over here. Now, some more fell in. As long as I've got 60-to-1 plus, 60 plus, corresponding to that which now fell in, it should be fine. But we don't look at it that way. We have a concept called choser v'niur. It gets reawakened. So when that first 3 ounces, right, fell into my 200-ounce soup, right? So that was fine. Or my 3 ounces fell into my 200-ounce soup, right? So then, as long as it was 180 ounces, I was good against my 3 ounces. I'm good to go. Now another 3 ounces fall in. So then we say that those first 3 ounces have choser v'niur, they have reawakened. And now I've got 6 ounces in there, and that is going to be a problem. Okay. Yes.
You said Jose Veneer?
Choser, it returns, v'niur, and it wakes up. Okay. Now, this is not happening so often. What are the questions that do come up often? If any of you had any questions that come up in the kitchen? So a question that comes up fairly often is, oh, we were making a cheese omelet and we took the meat spatula to scoop up the eggs, right? I had a meat soup and I used a dairy spoon to stir the soup. Or I had a parava soup in a dairy pot, but I used a meat ladle in order to scoop it out. So that's what normally, those are the questions that most normally come up. That I used the wrong pot, the wrong spatula, the wrong, right, the wrong item. Okay. So let me share with you the the basic principles. Okay, you're not going to all walk away from here as poskim who will be answering, answering kashrus hotline questions as they come in, right? But let's go over the general principles and then see how we can apply them to different cases. The first principle is we're only going to have a transferal from one thing to another, whether it's food to food, or whether it is pot to food, or whether it is utensil to food. You're only going to have a transferal if there is heat, if it is hot. And when we say hot, how are we defining hot? Yad soledet bo, right? That the hand will recoil, right? Which we'll say is about 105, 110 degrees. You might say, I take a shower, it's a lot more than that. I'm not recoiling. Yeah, that's when you're expecting it, right? But if you're not expecting it and you were to come in contact with a liquid, expecting it to be lukewarm and it's going to be hotter than that, you will recoil. Yad soledet bo. Let's say 105, 110 degrees. So, in the absence of Yad Soledet's bow, in the absence of heat, there are some exceptions we'll explain in a moment, but in general, in the absence of heat, it's not going to be a problem. So if I've got I've got some noodles and cheese. I've got some pasta and cheese for the kids in the fridge. And now I'm going to scoop it out and to put it onto a plate that I could warm it up for the kids. And I mistakenly take a parava, I mistakenly take a meat spoon and I scoop out the noodles and cheese, right? Or I take a parava spoon and I scoop it out, right? If it's a parava spoon, what's my question? Is that spoon still parava, or has that become dairy? If it's meat, then I have two questions. What's the status of the spoon? Is it compromised now because it's a meat spoon that has absorbed dairy? And what's the status of my noodles and cheese? Have they absorbed meat, so to speak, from the meat spoon? Now we're talking about a case where everything is clean. It's a clean, all right. If it's a meat spoon that has, some meatball sauce on it, then obviously we've got a problem, right? We're talking about that it's clean. So what would you say in such a case? If it's a par of a spoon, has it become dairy?
Not because
No.
because it's cold, right?
It has not become dairy because it is cold. If it's a meat spoon, has it become dairy? No. Has the noodles and cheese become compromised by that meat spoon? No. Why? Because everything is cold. Okay? So in such a case, if you used a meat spoon, what would you do? You would enjoy your noodles and cheese, take that meat spoon and take that meat spoon to the bathroom and rinse it off. Why to the bathroom?
Because if you, it'll be an issue if you do rinse it off in the sink. Now you're
Right, because in the sink, right, you don't want to rinse it off in your dairy sink because it's a meat spoon. You don't want to rinse it off in your meat sink because there's cheese on it, right? So therefore, you take it to the bathroom and rinse it off elsewhere, and then you are all fine. Okay? So the first principle to keep in mind is if it is cold, we are okay. Nothing has been transferred. Again, we're talking about a clean utensil, right? If there's meat on there, right, so then that's something else. You got to remove that meat. As long as it's cold, it's not going to spread, permeate throughout all the noodles, but you need to remove that area where there's any meat, any contact. Okay. So heat is one way through which there is what's called bliot, that which is absorbed in that will come out and affect the food. Now, there's another situation which is duchka de sakina and a davar charif. Okay, that's a mouthful, I know. Duchka de sakina is Aramaic for the pressure of the knife. If I'm cutting through something and it's a davar charif, I'm cutting through something that is sharp, something that like an onion. That's the classic davar charif. If I'm cutting through an onion, a cold onion with a cold dairy knife, so then, even though there is no medium of heat, the combination of those two factors, the pressure of the knife and something that is sharp, charif, that will have the ability, that will make that onion dairy.
because of the pressure.
When you've got the two factors, the pressure and it's a spicy thing. If I'm cutting through an apple, that's not going to be a problem. That's not going to make the apple dairy. I'm cutting through a banana. I'm cutting through a mushroom. It's not. But when I have the pressure of the knife and a davar charif and something that is spicy, then that has the ability to pull out from the bliot that which has been absorbed. Yes?
So how would you define, like an onion, I guess it's like acidic, really strong in flavor, but how else would you define other things that would fall into that category? Like
Certain
sharp
radishes, right?
sharp
Hot peppers, spicy. Garlic, I'm not probably garlic also.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
think garlic. If
Yeah.
onion, I would think garlic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So all of these spicy, acidic,
Food that
acidic.
you wouldn't bite into raw.
Yes. Okay. Now, so whereas if I take my meat knife, cold meat knife, and I cut through a cucumber, there's not a problem for me to now use that to add, to put some cheese on that, right? It has not made it meaty, right? But that same knife, I cut through the cucumber, and now I cut through an onion, right? I can put cheese on that cucumber. I can't put cheese on that onion. Even though if there was a medium of heat, if it was a hot knife or a hot cucumber or whatever it might be, or right, then it doesn't make a difference. The heat will extract from the utensil, from the pot. But either heat is a way that will move something from the utensil, the pot, to the food, or if you've got the double factor of duchka, sakina, pressure of the knife, along with a davar charif, a matter that is sharp. Another very important concept to know is what's called Eino ben Yomo. It's not within the day. Meaning, if something has not been used for 24 hours, then even with the medium of heat, anything that it might have absorbed has become negated, has become impotent. Let's put it like that. Negated is when you've got, right? It has no potency anymore. So if I take a hot, now I'm taking the same thing. I've got those noodles. I've got the noodles and cheese. Hot, not out of the fridge, hot. And now I mistakenly take a meat spoon and I stick it into that and I scoop out a whole load of the noodles. So now we have to assess what's the status of the noodles, what's the status of the spoon. What do you have to say? What's the status of the noodles?
If the utensil wasn't used,
was not used for 24 hours,
then we'd be good to go.
The noodles are good to go. Okay? Even though when it's hot, it has the ability to move stuff out from it to the food, but anything that it might be moving out has lost its potency since it's been 24 hours since it's been used with something hot. Okay?
This only applies to like things that have already been koshered and like toppled and stuff like that. That wouldn't apply to like actually like trafe utensils, right?
Okay, so Yoshi asked, will this apply even to trafe utensils? Okay, let me come back to that in a moment. So far we've answered what's the status of your noodles and cheese, your piping hot noodles and cheese that you just used a fully meaty spoon to scoop it out. That meaty spoon has not been used with anything hot, with any hot meat for the past 24 hours. Anything that it might have absorbed last time was hot meat was used there, it has lost its potency. The noodles and cheese are fine. Okay?
Yep.
How about that utensil?
It has to sit for 24 hours.
So, Gabrielle said it needs to sit for 24 hours. That utensil has been compromised. Why? Because it has meat inside of it, so to speak, and now it just absorbed dairy. So now it is a trafe spoon. And that will need to be kosherized if it's of a material that can be kosherized, right? If it's a metal utensil, we can kosherize that. We'll come to kosherizing at some point, right? It can be kosherized. Now, Gabriella said, wait 24 hours. Yes and no, okay? And that brings us back to Yoshi's question. Yoshi said, is the 24-hour only with something that was a kosher meat spoon that, right? Well, let's say you're visiting family and you've got a kosher pot and the family is not kosher observant. You've got a kosher pot set aside there and you're cooking your soup in your kosher pot and it needs a good stir. And along comes one of the family members there, and with the best of intentions, they open their drawer, they take out one of their clearly non-kosher utensils, and they stir it up for you. But that utensil hasn't been used in 24 hours. What would you say the din is with your soup?
Can't use it.
Why not?
Because the utensil hasn't been kosher.
Yes, but what's coming out of it? It's already past 24 hours, Victor pointed out.
Oh.
So nothing of any potency is coming out of it. Okay? Yoshi, that responded to you. Now, coming back to Gabriella's idea that this compromised meat spoon now,
So you could still have soup.
you can still have the soup. Okay?
You wouldn't intentionally take one of their spoons. It's
You
just
correct.
If they did it.
Correct. That goes back to ein mevatlin isu lechatchila. We don't go ahead and forthright go and nullify something, right? So Gabriella said, well, if you use this meat spoon going into your hot casserole over there, the meat spoon is not being used with meat, hot meat for 24 hours. So therefore it has no potency to affect your noodles and cheese. So the noodles and cheese is fine. The spoon has been compromised because it has absorbed meat. Now it has absorbed dairy. Gabriella said wait 24 hours. Well, waiting 24 hours will help if inadvertently you ended up using this again. Once again, now it's trait, but there's no potent trait, meaning non-kosher, but there's nothing of any potency that can come out. But that's not going to help us long term. We don't want to keep non-kosher utensils around. So that will either need to be kosherized, you need to put it away and you need to kosherize it, or if it's something that can't be kosherized, that's where goodwill comes in, right? Someone else might be able to use it, donate it to Goodwill. Maybe someone else will be able to use it. And we could assume that it's not the kosher consumer who's getting kitchenware from Goodwill. Yes, Gabriella.
So would you have to wait 24 hours before you could kosher it? Or no, you could just kosher it immediately?
Okay.
That's what
Okay. So would you have to wait 24 hours before you kosherize it or not? Well, how does one, so let's touch upon that and that'll be, yeah. How does one kosherize something? So, yeah?
depends on how it became
Good.
unkosher.
It depends on how it became non-kosher. We have a general rule, kibolo kach polto. The way it absorbed, that's the way that it can expel whatever it absorbed. Okay. So we have two basic categories. One is direct heat, like a frying pan, and the other is through the medium of liquid. So something that absorbed through direct heat, you would need to kosherize it. I'm just going to say kosher now instead of kosherize, right? You would need to kosher it through direct heat, to blowtorch it. Now, again, that will be the case, let's say, with a baking pan, right? A baking pan. You blowtorch a baking pan, it's not gonna, right? It's going to warp. It's not going to work. You just need to replace your baking pans. Frying pans, unless you've got a very expensive frying pan, blowtorching it is not going to work. You have a more typical frying pan with the Teflon, stuff like that, right? You're not going to stop blowtorching that. You just need to replace that. Okay? The more typical way of koshering something is hagala, immersion in hot water. Okay? So you would take this metal meat spoon that was mistakenly used to scoop out a hot casserole, and you would dip that into a big pot of boiling hot water. You insert it in there. Whatever went in will come out, and we are good to go. Gabriella asked, do you need to wait 24 hours? And to answer that, we sort of need to pull in a number of things that we've discussed. I might have a problem over here. I stick it into the pot. Before we come to that, let me present another situation, right? I have a big chicken soup, right? Someone's got a soup up on the fire at friend's house, parents' house, whatever it might be, who are not kosher observant. And they come along and they took it needs a stirring, and with the sweetest and most noble of intentions to try to help their wonderful family members who have this mishugas about kosher, but the soup needs to be stirred, right? They're going to take a perfectly clean spoon and stir it, but that spoon had been used within 24 hours. That non-kosher spoon had been used. What's the story of the soup? It depends. What will it depend on? Quantity of soup versus spoon. Now, instead of a drop of milk falling into my chicken soup, what's fallen into my chicken soup? This spoon has fallen into my chicken soup. Is my soup 60 times the size of the spoon? Now you might say, Rabbi, why do you need 60 times the size of the spoon? I understand you're concerned that it might have absorbed something that's going to go out, but it's not 100% fully pork. It's a spoon. But we don't know how much it might have absorbed and how much it might be expelling. So we play it safe and say we view that entire spoon as if it was food stuff. If you've got 60 times the spoon of soup, we're okay. Right? We wouldn't go ahead and do that, but if it was done, b'di avad, if it was done, we're okay.
So that would be, let's just say, a spoon, but like a small pot of food. That small pot of food pretty much be trade for that point, right?
If you don't have 60 times the spoon, no good. It's treif, correct. Right? How do you know how much the spoon is? Well, you can just do a little displacement of water and see how many ounces that spoon is. See how many ounces have you got in the pot. If you got 60-to-1 ratio, you're good to go. Otherwise, not good to go. Let's double back now to Gabriella's question. We have that compromised spoon, and we need to kosher it now. So Gabriella said, you need to wait 24 hours or not. So that's going to depend. You want to play it safe, wait 24 hours. But let me ask you another question before we get to the 24 hours. When I put it into my pot, so now I dipped it into my boiling hot pot. And now what's going to happen? It's going to expel anything. Is that going to compromise my pot now?
Depends on the size.
Okay. So if I've got 60 times pot versus utensil, then I'm good to go, and I won't need to wait 24 hours because whatever comes out will become nullified. Okay? Now, you might ask, well, isn't that deliberately going ahead and nullifying? Well, yes. For me to then drink that water would be a problem because I deliberately nullified my spoon in there. But we're just spilling out that water afterwards. We're not drinking that water. Okay. If I don't have 60 times that amount, so then what will I need to do? Wait 24 hours. And that way, whatever will be expelled from that utensil by the boiling hot water is not going to have the potency to affect anything, to mess up the pot in which I koshered. Okay? So to go over again, the three, and what I want you all to gain from this is knowledge of the basic concepts. And that way you'll know if something is a question or not, right? In other words, if one of the kids accidentally took a meat spoon and had their morning cereal with that, do you need to call the rabbi? No. Why not? It's cold. So the question doesn't really begin. Okay? So the concepts that we have when it comes to the common shilas, right, is if everything is cold, there has not been a transferal. It has not, right? Now, that's not to mean, that's not to say if I have a piece of cold cut and I have of deli and a cold piece of cheese, right? That's going to be a problem, right? I'll need to separate them. I'll need to rinse them off and make sure there's no residue of either one on it. But then I'm okay, right? But, right, when it comes to utensils, if it's cold, there's no transference. Unless you have that double whammy of pressure of the knife and something that is charif, sharp. Number two, if it's been 24 hours since it's been used with anything hot, then it does not have any potency. Okay. However, if I've got a meat knife and I'm using that to cold, I'm using that to cut an onion, even if it has not been used in 24 hours, the onion will become meaty. In other words, the combination of that meat, of the pressure of the knife and the davar charif, not only can it extract something that it is cold from the cold knife, but it will even give potency to something that has been more than 24 hours. Okay? But in general, 24 hours renders something that it no longer has its potency. Something cold, and therefore nothing can really come out from it. It will become compromised from something else. But, okay. Yes, Gabriella.
So the knife that was used, a meat knife to cut the onion becomes meat. But even after 24 hours, the onion is still meat.
Even if the knife has not been used for 24 hours, the onion becomes meat, and that onion will retain meaty even after 24 hours.
Only the utensil, not the food.
Correct. It's not like a utensil that it loses potency, right? Food stuff will retain its power. Okay, I think that's a good mouthful.
That's great.
All right, guys.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. Everybody okay over there? Everybody's very quiet tonight. Did I mute you? No? Okay. I didn't mute everybody. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I mean
Thank you, Rabbi.
mute anybody.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everyone.
Lila Tov. Have a good night,
Bye,
everybody.
little Rabbi.
Lila Tov. Everyone should feel well.
Good night.